How can we create a RAG AI agent that can actually deal with our large Excel files? This is a question that doesn't really have a simple answer, and it's one that's overlooked in the vast majority of RAG tutorials that you see all over YouTube or anywhere else. And the reason for that is because you can't treat large Excel files the same way you do PDFs or Word docs when you're creating vector databases for most RAG ecosystems. It's not as simple as chunking up the data, turning it into a vector, and going from there, because these large Excel files or Google Sheets are relational. They need full context. We can't just chop it up halfway through and expect our AI agent to give us correct answers. So what do? Well, most people just ignore it. But in this video, I'm going to show you a RAG AI agent that I believe solves this problem. This agent allows us to use Excel files inside of our RAG system because it doesn't treat them as Excel files. It sends them to Supabase and turns them into proper database structures using Postgres. And by doing that, we're able to ask it questions and get accurate answers because we don't rely on vectorization. We're instead going to rely on SQL. But for you, the user, it all works the same. You just ask your agent a question in natural language and you're going to get an answer back. So in this video, I'm not only going to give you the template for this agent, but I'm going to explain how it all works, why certain decisions were made, and what you need to do to turn it into your own. So with that, let's jump into it. All right, so here's a look at our AI agent. Now, the way this video is going to go is I'm going to kind of break down all the different sections of this agent so you understand what's going on big picture wise and what to expect for the rest of the video. From there, we're going to jump into a little bit of theory. I'm going to explain how this works and why it works the way it does, because you need to understand how sort of like vectorization works in normal RAG systems to understand why we're doing what we're doing. And that fundamental understanding is crucial when it comes time for you to edit this yourself for your particular use case. After we get through the theory, we're going to come back to here and we're going to run some demos. And as we run through the demos, we're then going to go into each module one by one. And I'm going to explain to you what's happening, why it's working, and what you need to change if you want to make edits. All right, so let's jump into it. So up top, what do we got? Well, we just have our AI agent hub, right? This has all the different tools as well as the chat interface. For this video, we're just going to be using the basic n8n chat, but understand you could change this to be whatever you want, right? This could be in Slack. You could have this operate in like email, anything, WhatsApp, Telegram, whatever. And you'll see down here some of the tools we have, right? We're using Postgres memory, so we're not just using simple memory anymore. And then I'll go through some of these later in more detail. You'll also notice we have GraphRAG in here. If you have not watched the GraphRAG video yet, you do not have to understand this video, but I'm going to link it up here right now. I highly suggest going through it because the template you get here is one that includes GraphRAG functionality. So you can not only do Excel files, but you can also have a RAG system that deals with your documents. And on that note, this whole template is available for you for free. Just go down below, go to my free Skool, go to this lesson. It's going to be called like Agentic AI RAG or something, whatever I decide to call it. Download the template, upload it, and you can follow along really easily. Now, coming down below, we also have a data ingestion pipeline. So this is how our Excel file goes into our database, goes into Supabase. So essentially, everything's going to be happening from a Google Drive. So we're going to have a folder in Google Drive, like you see here, that every file that gets dumped into it then gets either vectorized in a graph database, or it's going to be sent to a Postgres table. So this is essentially the section of the agent that takes our data from your computer, from your cloud, wherever, and turns it into something that your RAG AI agent can use. Lastly, down here, we have different sort of data sync pipelines. This one here and here, that's for syncing the data if we ever delete a document. So if I delete an Excel file in my Google Drive, right, our little waiting room, this is going to make sure it gets deleted inside of Supabase, right? And kind of same token, if I were to ever edit one of my Excel files, let's say I'm actually changing things in there, this makes sure whatever edits I make inside of Google Drive show up inside of Supabase, inside my RAG system. So this is just to make sure this is actually kind of a production ready thing, and we're not just throwing stuff into Supabase as a cool demo for YouTube. And if you ever try to use it in reality, it would break. This thing can be used for real. You can make edits, you can delete things. It will be synced and it will be usable. So that's the high level infrastructure of the agent. Now let's kind of talk a little bit about what's going on. So if you watched the GraphRAG video, you know we went into this kind of deeply, but I'm going to go over this very quickly before. Naive RAG, traditional RAG. How does it work and why does it not work for Excel files? Why does this video even need to exist? Well, remember, when we are creating a RAG system, how does it usually work? You have a bunch of documents. Each document then becomes chunked up. If I have a 1,000-page document, it does not go into the vector database as a 1,000-page document. Instead, it actually becomes like 10,000 little chunks, right? So imagine this page getting into 3 different chunks, right? Chunk 1, chunk 2, chunk 3. Works great in text. From there, what happens? Well, each chunk becomes a embedding, right? So this chunk becomes an embedding, and embedding is just a mathematical like equation, essentially. It's a bunch of numbers. We're taking text and we're turning into numbers. From there, what happens? Well, those numbers then become a vector. So what you see here is chunk 3 being depicted as a vector, right? Imagine this is like a 3-dimensional graph. In reality, it's actually way more dimensions. But you see how we've gone from a document, one coherent thing, into a chunk, into some math, into a vector. And when you ask a question of your AI agent, that's a RAG AI agent, how does it work? Well, your question also becomes an embedding. So imagine your question became this series of numbers. It then takes those numbers and it says, which of these vectors are closest to the question, right? These numbers, which one is closest? Let's say it says it's chunk 3. It says, great. Oh, chunk 3 was closest to the question. That has to be the answer. It then takes chunk 3 and probably several other chunks near it. And then what does it do? It brings it back to your AI agent. Your AI agent takes all those chunks, does its AI magic, and says, hey, here's the answer. This works for text documents. Why? Because chunk 3, like key agenda items, if I ask for Q4 2023 finances, it can give me all this. It doesn't necessarily need all this information, right? So chunking works. Chunking does not work with Excel. Where do I chunk here? How can I chunk up this document so I get the right answer when I say, hey, what was the last name of order ID 1017? Well, you might say like, oh, I'll just go here and I'll say Chen. Well, how does it know this is the last name, right? It's all the way up here. What if this whole section was what was chunked, right? Furthermore, what if I ask a question like, hey, what was the highest price order item for the last 7 days? Well, to understand that, it needs to have everything, right? Because it needs to compare items. It needs to be relational. I can't take a small chunk out of here and think I'm going to get the correct answer if I ask something that requires context from the top and bottom. That's a serious problem. Furthermore, this whole thing, this is semantics. This is meanings of words. The way AI figures out, hey, what this chunk means and what chunk is closer and how it gets depicted, that's all like fuzzy AI, like meanings of words. What does Q4 2023 financial review mean? It's not a math question. It's not an exact science. But when you're dealing with things like Excel, and I'm asking for a specific price in comparison to everything else, that needs to be exact. It can't be semantic. It needs to essentially be a math equation. So between the chunking and the fact that when it comes to, letters and documents and written text, it tends to be more like meaning based. You see how you run into a problem almost immediately when you start being like, how can I get my RAG AI agent to deal with large Excel files? That is the problem we're solving in this video. And if you already understood that, I'm sorry for ranting for a few minutes, but you need to understand why the normal way doesn't work to understand why we're doing what we're about to do. So what is it that we're actually going to do? Well, we're going to be taking Excel files and Google Sheets that look like this, and we are going to be turning it into Postgres tables that look like this. Well, Chase, this looks exactly the same. Why am I taking my Excel file and doing all this nonsense to throw it inside a Supabase to make it a Postgres table? I don't even know what Postgres is. What the heck is the point of this? Well, the reason is because I can ask questions about this Postgres table using something called SQL, Structured Query Language, and get accurate answers back every single time. And I can't do that with this. I can't do that with Excel. And this is why when you talk to people who are in actual businesses, like medium-sized businesses, larger scale businesses, their database is not Excel, okay? We're trying to do a workaround here because either you or your client, and this is going to be very common with the clients you're going to be dealing with in the AI agency space, they use Excel, they use Google Sheet as their database. That's not the right way to do it, but they're not going to stop. So we need a solution to this problem of people who want RAG AI agents hooked up to their sad Excel databases. And this is how we do it. We take their database and we turn it into a Postgres table because Postgres is a proper database and it allows us to use SQL to ask questions about it. And what is SQL? SQL is like essentially a baby coding language. That's what SQL is. But you don't need to know SQL. You know why? You know who knows SQL? AI knows SQL. And so what happens is all this right here, execute SQL query. What's it doing? You ask AI a question about your Excel file. So let's bring this up. Let's ask it a question about this. Let's ask, hey, what did Bob Smith order? Let's ask that question. So let's go into our agent. Let's actually see this work for real. What did Bob Smith order on 8/16? So what's happening here? What are we looking at? Well, we'll go into this in more detail later, but for you to understand, what AI is doing is it's going to create a SQL query. It's essentially creating this mini line of code that it is then going to use on this database to get the answer we want, which means we can now get accurate answers using SQL without knowing SQL. And so we have now solved the problem that we talked about earlier, right? Where it's like there's chunking and it's semantic and it's not math and it's not accurate. Well, we solved that. We skipped all this nonsense. We're not vectorizing. We're instead turning it into Postgres tables. We're turning it into a true database that we can then run our mini code, our SQL on, and the AI handles all of it. From your front end, it's all the same. You're just chatting with AI and it's doing all this in the background, which means I now get an answer like you see below, where it tells me exactly what Bob Smith ordered, gives me the order ID, the date, the product, the quantity, analysis, all tons of insights that would be impossible to get accurately if we were just shoving Excel in there. That is why this video was made. That is why you need to understand creating some sort of SQL RAG agent. And that is how you can deal with your clients that are like, I want my RAG database put inside my AI RAG agent. Well, it's like, you're not using a real database, but I'll do it. I got you. You're just gonna have to pay me. So hopefully that kind of gives you an understanding of what the heck we're doing. What's the point of this, right? Excel sucks. Excel isn't a true database, but we want their Excel database in the RAG agent. How do we do it? We take Excel and we turn it into a Postgres table, and then we use SQL to run mini code on the table to get us the answers we want. And again, if you're still super confused what the heck is SQL, we can actually go into the logs here. All right, you see this up here on the top right? That's what was created. This is SQL, the SQL query, select, order ID, That's what's happening. And that's the output on the bottom that gives us the information we wanted. This little SQL query that was created, that's what's going on in the background. That's the real gold of this AI agent system, right? So there you have it. All right, so now we have an understanding of kind of what's happening and why we're doing it. So now you should have a little bit better appreciation for this data ingestion pipeline, right? Everything you see here, right? Everything in the green and the blue, that is the process by which we take that Excel file, right? This guy, and turn it into this guy. And so let's actually start here. This is where I want to start so you can understand how the data is moving from left to right in our system. So everything needs to start with some sort of trigger so it's automated. Now, if you watched my previous video on the GraphRAG system, this will look very familiar to you. Why does it look familiar? Because we're using the same exact folder, right? We have this folder inside of our Google Drive. You can name this whatever you want. Mine's called LightRag Demo, but this is just a central like holding location where whenever I want a file to be inside my RAG system, I don't want to have to go into Postgres and do it all manually. I just want to dump it in a Google Drive and just know it's going to automatically take care of it. That's what this folder is. So you need to create some sort of folder in your Google Drive, call it RAG, call it whatever, and it's going to be your one-stop shop for all the documents, right? This is where you place documents you want in there. This is where you delete your documents. You can even edit them from inside here, and it will all be handled automatically and update everything in RAG. You'll see here on the bottom, we have the GraphRAG text ingestion as well. This template includes not only the Excel pieces, but it also includes all of the GraphRAG infrastructure from my previous video. So again, I'll link it one more time. I highly suggest you check it out because this is actually what is like pillar 1 and 2 of a true RAG, right? Everything today, right? We're focused on Excel stuff, but this is what deals with text, right? And it deals with it really, really well. And so this pipeline handles both automatically. We have this if statement right here. And what is this checking? Well, this is just checking to see, all right, is the file a Google Sheet or is it an Excel file? That's all that it's checking. And if it's a Google Sheet or Excel file, it goes up top. and deals with all this stuff. And if not, it's like a text document, a PDF, whatever. It goes down here, it goes into our GraphRAG system. So this is how it's able to intelligently figure out which branch it should go through. Now, like we talked about before, we have our Excel to Postgres database. So it's going to loop over all the items so you can dump as many as you want there. And it's going to handle it one by one. It downloads the file. It then extracts all the information from the file. So it gets all the rows, all the headers. And then we have this code node. And this code node does a couple things. Now, very scary code, 150 lines. You think I wrote all this? No, I didn't write a single line. You know who did? Gemini, actually. I really like Gemini, but let me tell you what's happening here. There's a few things happening. So this code node does a couple things. One, it creates the table. So it creates essentially that empty warehouse where all our data is going to go. And then it fills that warehouse with all the data from the cells. Now, it needs to do this somewhat intelligently because some things are text, some things are dates, some things need to be changed because the formatting isn't correct. This code node handles all of it. And then once it does that, it just repeats the cycle for each and every file. Now, we can actually see this in action if we go to executions and we take a look at when I uploaded one. So here we actually uploaded two at the same time, and that's why you see it looping over two items here. So right file was created, it saw it was an Excel file, it starts looping, downloads, extracts, and then you see this code node. And you can see here on the right, might be a little tough, but it created this SQL thing, right? Remember the whole SQL thing I keep talking about? That's what's happening here. This is the SQL code to create a new table, and it creates it intelligently based on the headers from the Excel file, right? So it's able to like, oh, these are the headers. It's able to intelligently recognize the headers, and then when it creates the table, create those same headers up here. But you'll notice it does a few things as well. It also like puts an underscore here, so it makes it easier to create more SQL commands down the road. It actually changes the name a little bit to get rid of like the file ender, so it doesn't say like .xlsx. It actually does a lot of quality of life stuff for you in the background. So it gives us the table, gives us the name, and then it cleans all the data, right? You see that right here, right? Executes it, inserts the rows, repeat, repeat, repeat. That's the data ingestion piece. Now that you understand how data gets to our system, let's talk a little bit about our AI agent itself. What's happening with this guy? Well, like I said, we have our chat message here. Let's take a look at our system prompt, which is always extremely important. So here's the system prompt. And remember, the first thing this AI agent is going to do once it gets your question is figure out which path do I go down? Remember, there's two paths. The first path is this one we've been talking about today, right? The Postgres path, the one for all our Excel files and Google Sheets. But we also have a second piece of our RAG ecosystem, and that is our knowledge graph, our GraphRAG, everything we talked about in my previous video. Make sure you check it out. And so it needs to figure out, okay, is this question about documents? That would be here. Or is it about database stuff? That would be here. It's going to have to kind of figure it out somewhat intelligently just based on the nature of your question. And then once it figures out what path to go down, it then has specific rules for each. So right here's the SQL one where we're saying, hey, I want you to do schema discovery, which we'll talk about here in a second, execute the query and give me analysis. And then if it's doing the GraphRAG tool, we're just saying, hey, send it straight to the GraphRAG, let LightRAG on the background figure all this out, then just give us the answer it provides you. Now, where can you change things here? Where can things go wrong? We're telling it right now to just be smart about it based on our question. If you wanted to take this a step further, what you could do is you could say, hey, this is everything inside my Postgres database, like just general knowledge, like it's going to have graphs on, it's going to have databases on employee data and order info. And then I could say, hey, for my GraphRAG stuff, this has stuff like meeting notes, right? This has stuff like chat histories, whatever. You can put that inside the system prompt so it can more accurately know which branch to go down. Because right now, I haven't given it any info. I'm like, hey, figure it out based on the question, right? So it's kind of in the dark, but you can give it to the answers to the test, right? You can say, hey, like if I ask you a question about order info or employee data, go do the SQL stuff. If not, do GraphRAG, right? So you can help it out. Feel free to edit that here, but everything else should be good to go. All right, now let's kind of walk through what happened when we asked it the question earlier about Bob's order. So let's walk through it. We asked the question, went through chat. It goes to the AI agent, and then it figures out, which path do I go down? It intelligently figured out, hey, we're going to do the SQL query thing, right? But to do a SQL query, it needs some information. It needs information about the database, the table itself. It needs to know the headers. It needs to know what data is in there. How does it know what's there? How does it even know what's available? Well, that's where we have this get database schema. We have it run this tool, this get database schema, which is this automation right here, which allows it to look at all the tables inside of our Supabase system and see how they're set up, what the schema is. The schema is like the blueprint of the table. It doesn't need to know the exact data inside, but it does need to know how it's set up. It needs to know, oh, there's a name section, there's an email section, a department section, right? And once it has that blueprint, then it's able to do the query using SQL to get the information. So it needs to know the blueprint. And once it has the blueprint, it does the code. And then once it runs the code, it gets the answer and gives the answer to you. That's the path it goes down. And we can see that whole process occur if we look at the logs. So, right, question gets asked, it's put into chat memory. The model's doing its thing, but you see here, get database schema, and I'll move my thing over here, right? What do you see on the output? This is it breaking down all the information of all the tables and all their columns, right? It's getting the blueprint. From there, it brings it back to AI, and then it executes the query, right? This is the query it created, and it was only able to do a correct query because it knew the blueprint. So it does the query, it gets the answer goes back to AI, answer goes to you. Okay, so now you should be a total expert on sort of the flow of data when we ask a question to how you get the answer. And you should also be a complete expert on how all this data is ingested, right? Of course. All right, so the last part we need to go over is sort of this data syncing, okay? So like I said, we have this light rag data cleanup. This is for our GraphRAG. Again, last video we went over this. We have a similar one down here, and I'll show you how it works once we delete the data. But we also have the Excel edit syncs. So oftentimes these Excel files are a living document, right? It's not great practice to assume nobody's going to edit them. So how do we do that? Well, again, this becomes another like shortcoming of Excel, because what you would think would happen would be, hey, I come in here and I change the price per item up here where it says 1,200, right? Kind of zoom in. If I change this to 3,000, you would assume that over here in order info, this would also change to 3,000 automatically. That would be the case if you were using a proper database system that had some front end attached to this. That is not how it works in Excel, and it's yet another Excel shortcoming. But we get around it. How do we get around it? Well, what happens is this triggers when there's been an edit in the file, and then for all intents and purposes, it's going to nuke that table. It's going to wipe all of its info, and then it's going to re-upload it with the new information. Is that the most elegant way to go about it? Unfortunately, it kind of is when it comes to this Excel, thing we've done. And as I've kind of like beat into you by now, this whole thing is a workaround because people love Excel and they love Google Sheets and they'll never get off them, and they want the benefits of a true database at the same time. This is how we get around it. There's no other way to really do this. Well, there is, but it's actually not worth the hassle. And that would be us grabbing every single row, grabbing every single column, comparing it to the new one. It's not worth it. This takes half of a second, if even, and it's just fine for now, right? So that's what's happening here, right? And so it also checks like, hey, same kind of thing before. Is it an Excel file? Is it a sheet? Because we don't want to do with its documents. Executes the query to remove all the data, downloads the file extraction, and pretty much does the same thing up here. It does it down here, but it doesn't recreate the table because that table is already there. We're just filling in the information. So that's how that works. So you are able to come in here and change data and have it get updated accordingly. Lastly, we have data cleanup. So what happens if I delete some Excel documents inside my Google Drive? Does it automatically get deleted inside of Supabase over here? Well, not really, but with this automation, it does. So how does it work? Well, let me show you. So if I come into Google Drive and I decide, hey, you know what? I don't care about our info, more employee data, delete it, get rid of all of it. Well, what's going to happen? Let's see. We're going to go to executions and we're going to find out what happens. Well, actually, no, we don't have to do executions. I'm sorry. We'll run it right now. Let me just get rid of these triggers. I come down here and we're going to execute workflow. And we'll see what happens. All right. So what happens is it gets all the file IDs from inside of Drive. So it gets all these file IDs. And then it gets all the table information inside of Postgres. It then merges them and it compares them and it says, hey, what's inside Supabase, what's inside here, that's not inside here, right? What's orphaned? And it then deletes whatever's orphaned. So that way, if it gets deleted inside of Google Drive, which is your one-stop shop for everything, it'll get deleted inside of Supabase. And this runs on a trigger. It's set for every 24 hours. You can adjust it as you wish. It's also smart enough to ignore certain tables. So in this case, it ignores n8n chat histories, even though that's on Google Drive. So you'll see now that's the only thing in there. So I want to just really quickly talk about this unrestricted stuff and the row level security. Long story short, what you're seeing right now is a system that's built for a single user, right? And the permissions you have inside of n8n bypass things like row level security anyways. So for this demo, it doesn't really matter. Now, if you're doing a multi-user setup, you will have to create new users inside of Supabase and give them appropriate permissions and edit the tables accordingly. I'm not going to deep dive that into this video. AI can actually walk you through that very, very well. Just understand if you are going into a multi-user setup with your agent in production, there are a few more steps down the line. And lastly, in this video, I'm not going to dive super deep into how to set up Supabase and everything. You should have seen that in previous videos. But for Postgres, because I know someone's going to ask about it, come to connect, go down to transaction pooler. All the parameters you need are here. So all in all, what do you get? You get a system that's able to take in our Excel documents and properly ingest them into Supabase. We're able to delete it on one side and have it sync up. We're able to edit it on one side and have it also sync up. And we have a RAG system that's able to intelligently figure out what tables we have, how they're set up, and then create SQL queries to give us correct answers. That's what's happening. That's what this video was all about, right? So also on top of that, we also have all the GraphRAG, right? So this is really two systems in one. In reality, what you should do is you should have watched the previous GraphRAG video, set all that up, come here, downloaded this new template, and set it all up as well. All right, so I think that kind of covers it. We went through a lot pretty quickly, and as you saw, it's a little bit involved, but once you understand the logic of it, like why are we doing what we're doing, right? Why are we going through all this trouble to turn something from an Excel file and send it into Postgres? It becomes a little more clear, right? And once you understand that fundamental clarity, you see like, oh, this actually can do a lot. When I'm able to separate my RAG ecosystem into one section that's for like SQL, Postgres, Excel files, right? And I treat it like that. And I have another section for more traditional RAG, whether that's just your normal vectorization or you take it a step further with GraphRAG, you can create a really robust RAG AI agent where I just ask it questions in plain language and it does what it needs to do to give me accurate answers, right? And we're not going to hallucinate on these chopped up Excel files that just like, it isn't realistic. Like that's not good enough. This is good enough. And so make sure you check out the Skool, download the template, get this working for yourself. Let me know in the comments what you thought and what issues you ran into. I'm really excited about this one. This actually took a lot of work. And as always, I'll see you guys around.